Okay, I'm pretty much there as far as the minimum wiring I need to do to actually try and start the motor. Just to sum up, I did the cutout switch to the solenoid. I've got new battery cables, 4-gauge battery cables. Ground one attaches here, positive one comes over to the post on the solenoid, and then I've added another eyelet with a heavy gauge wire. This is going to be, this already had an eyelet on the end, this was just an extra piece of wire I had, so I'll probably end up changing that, but this is going to be my main 12-volt feed to everything else once I decide to actually tie it up into the wiring of the boat here. For now though, I'm just going to let this hang, and I'll attach with the jumper to this green wire, which I've got going over here. This ties into the purple wire. This is my 12-volt supply to the amplifier module. The white wire coming off the amplifier module plug, that runs all the way up here to my new points wiring. The black wire from the points wiring goes to a ground right here. That's how it was originally. So if I supply 12 volts to that green wire, that'll turn the ignition on. I've got my white wire coming off my solenoid coil hanging here. If I put 12 volts to this, it'll close the solenoid and spin the engine. So technically, right now, I could actually just jumper this and get it to actually have live ignition and run. I still don't have my regulator hooked up. I believe this is the regulator right here. So I believe this is going to tie into the wires that come out of the alternator over here. So I got these right here. I'm probably going to have to come around. I'll have to check the wiring diagram on that. Basically what that does is that gives you enough energy to keep the battery charged up and while the motor's running, so that the battery doesn't run down. But for the short amount of times I'm going to be hopefully running this in the preliminary phases, I don't have to worry about charging up the battery. So I think at this point I'm going to go get my battery. Okay, got the big truck battery in there. It's not fully charged because I've been using it on that tractor, on the IH350, but it should be more than enough to spin this thing. So, especially with the plug still up. So my first test, I'm just not going to hook up the ignition circuit. I'm just going to try the starter. Alright, it's looking good. So now I'm going to clean up my spark plugs. Well, two of these plugs cleaned up really well, and the third one was a little rougher because I just cleaned it with some contact cleaner in that, because that was actually sitting down where it got wet. Probably treat this to a new set of spark plugs if it runs, but for the time being I'm just going to use these. So I'm going to install 2 of the 3 plugs, and I'm going to leave the third one out for testing to see if I've got spark, just to verify I still have spark. The plug wires, this one's not labeled. This one's label number 2, so that obviously goes in the middle, which it looks like it kind of wants to go there. And this one's labeled number 3 and it wants to go to the bottom, so this has got to be number 1. So I'm going to put number 2 and number 3 in and leave number 1 out. Okay, now I'm going to just use this alligator clip to clip this onto here and hold this on here. And that's going to send the 12 volts to my amplifier module. And then I'll pulse the starter and we'll see if we've got spark. Okay, so I've got the spark plug rigged up here, grounded to that bracket. And let's see. Nice spark. Good. Alright, so we know we got compression and we got spark. So what's the third part of the equation? Fuel. Alright. So what I don't like about this is that this 55 horse model a 3-cylinder, and it's using a separate carb for each cylinder. And I'm kind of intimidated by that for a couple of reasons. First reason is because as far as tuning it goes, I have like very little experience tuning a multi-carb engine. The other thing is that you've got 3 times as many possibilities for something to go wrong. Instead of just 1 float bowl sticking, you could have 3 float bowls sticking. Instead of 1 carb being clogged, you could have 3 carbs that are clogged. So I mean, my 64 40 horse was a 2-cylinder. Used 1 carburetor to feed 2 cylinders. Nice, straightforward, and easy to work on, for the most part. So this is a little bit different animal here. So what we got on this side is your fuel comes in here, comes up to here. This is your fuel pump. Your fuel pump has a pipe coming off the bottom right here that goes over to the crankcase. That uses vacuum from the crankcase, or pressure from the crankcase, to operate a diaphragm in here that actually makes this pump work. This is a diaphragm type fuel pump. Fuel goes in here and comes out this line and then goes over to somewhere underneath there. It must go over to some sort of a distribution type deal that would split it up to the 3 carbs. I can't see it, but common sense tells me it's in there somewhere. Anyways, I could assume right off the bat that all 3 carbs need to be rebuilt from it sitting so long, being in such lousy shape. But I did find Startron fuel stabilizer, a bottle of it in the boat here, which tells me that they were probably treating their fuel with fuel stabilizer, which is a good sign. Maybe they were actually taking care of that part of it, and maybe all this damage came after. But what I'm going to do is right here it says filter. So I'm betting if I remove this screw that there's some kind of a screen behind there, and I'm going to open that up and see how it looks. Well, I'll tell you what, you know what's nice? The fact that it looks clean as a whistle. It looks really good in there. And look at this screen. Nice and clean. If the screen had all rust on it, then I know there was water contamination and fuel that caused corrosion and everything. If the carbs look as good on the inside as this filter does, then I might actually be able to get away with not having to service these carburetors, which would be awesome. I've got this fuel tank here, but I think this is the one from the old boat. The one that had the 40 horsepower Johnson that I had the junk. The reason why is because it's cracked right here, which is exactly what was wrong with the other one I had. And then my neighbor gave me an old metal tank that he had, and that one worked really well. So, but I know this boat came with a tank just like this one, so I gotta go over and check in the barn and see what I've got over there for tanks. This has got fuel in it, but it smells like turpentine, so I think it's stale fuel, and also it's missing the vent here, so I think that would allow, that probably allowed water to get in there. So when I went back to the barn, I found this can. This came with the boat. This was a freebie with the boat. Actually came with 2. They both had fuel in them. I checked the fuel in this one. The fuel is pre-mixed, looks good, and doesn't look like it's contaminated. So, and it doesn't look like it's that old. So I think this might have been when he was trying to last run it. Found my hose set up, but the O-ring in the end of the connections there are bad. But it does sound like fuel is getting into the carburetor, so I'm going to see what happens when I crank. Alright, I got the manual choke on. And let's see. Oh, that battery's low. I think what I'll do is I'll put the battery on charge overnight. One more quick try. as far as I want to go without any water hooked up to it. Alright, a couple of quick observations. Right now, the lower end seems to be in gear. If I try and turn this, it actually wants to turn the crankshaft, which I would have thought this would be in neutral until voltage was applied, but I might be wrong about how that works. There's only 2 wires that go down there, and then I'm assuming it's using a ground as a return, so I would have thought that 12 volts on one is forward and 12 volts on the other is reverse, and then I would have thought no voltage on either one would be neutral, but maybe I'm wrong about that. The other thing is, I just hooked the water up to it and I had it running, and it was definitely building pressure in this lower part here because water was squirting out on the air muffs, but it didn't seem like any water was flowing up into the cooling system, which I had let it cool down. I mean, it's warm to the touch, but it's not super hot. I didn't want to suddenly hook up 50-degree water to the cooking hot engine that was just screaming, because might run the risk of damaging something. So I'm going to turn the water back on and see if it starts to cool down.